Hi, everyone. This is Ray Luskin. I'm an award-winning artist, author, and creative activist. And I founded Creative Activists Turning Pain to Purpose to amplify the power of art, storytelling, and service as tools for healing and social change. As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, I know firsthand how creativity can save your life. It helped me find my voice, and now I help others do the same through workshops, writing, speaking, and I support people who are ready to rise from trauma and turn their lived experiences into purpose-driven leadership. This isn't just about recovery. It's about impact, visibility, and becoming the change we wish to see. And today I'm very honored to have Elizabeth Foley with us. And welcome. I'm so excited you're here. And Elizabeth is an award-winning artist, creativity coach, and she's based in Asheville, North Carolina, which I've been there. It's fun. I like that area. Her work spans from ceramic sculptures, series, and amplifies the voices of domestic violence survivors. And she's going to tell us all about this project, which is unbelievable. I love it. And stories about intentional creativity. She's been painting focused on women's empowerment. And I've also done some study with Shiloh, so it's wonderful. And I spoke to her a few years ago, too. Her work has been exhibited in permanent installations across the United States. Elizabeth's art emerged from a deep commitment to using creativity as a catalyst for personal and social transformation. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks so
Hi.
much for having me.
I'm thrilled. We connected online. You never know where you're going to meet somebody. They read something you write or you post a picture and wow, there's this instant like I got to talk to this person. So, and that's how it works with creative activists. We pay attention to synchronicity. So, first, let's just talk a little bit about your background. I know you've been on a personal journey from healing from domestic abuse and that led you this creative journey. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, let's just dive into the real vulnerable stuff, huh? Um, yeah, I mean, I think the story really starts a little bit before that moment, and it starts basically I've always been really creative. I always say since my first box of crayons, I've wanted to be an artist. And there was a time in my life where I kind of lost that. And, I had been trying to make it as an artist in the world and I was super struggling. And I ended up just taking a day job, thinking, oh, I'll do the day job and I'll keep doing my art on the side. And then one thing led to another. There was more and more responsibility, more and more to hold at the job, less and less energy afterwards. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Then I became a mom and creativity just fell by the wayside. And I lost a lot of myself. And at that point in my life was when I found myself at the time, I just thought it was not a great relationship. Um, I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't really understand how much of myself I had lost. And it was I don't even remember how I came across it, but I started reading other survivor stories. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. This is what I'm going through. I had gone from being this confident, strong, creative woman to not even knowing who I was anymore and feeling so small. And I was able to see in other people's stories oh, this is because of the manipulation and the control and this real pattern of um this pattern of abuse that was happening. So most of what I experienced. So anyway, that's when I found out that's when I was like, oh, this is what's happening. This is abuse. This is domestic violence. So most of what I experienced wasn't it wasn't like somebody physically hitting me. There was a couple of moments of that and I always found ways to justify it, to
Mhm.
talk my way out of it, to say, oh, this just happened because this is okay because this. Because I think I didn't want to accept that it was happening to me, you
That's
know?
not unusual. I've worked in
Right.
this arena for a long time, and I found for one of my favorite tools was the power of the wheel of power and control.
Yeah.
because it's a broad spectrum of things. It's not just, well, most people think, oh, he hits me,
Yeah.
or, but it is so much more.
Yeah.
Control of money, isolating you from people, belittling you constantly. So I applaud you that you read these stories and that you took charge of your life. That's really challenging. And so many women are afraid to leave because
Yeah.
of one reason or another. So I
Well,
applaud you.
it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's terrifying to leave because, first, in order to do so, we have to be really honest with ourselves, right? We have to
Right.
be able to like look at the shame and unpack it. And that's really uncomfortable. Like most of us don't want to do that. And and then are all the other like uncomfortable conversations. But I remember when I was really coming to terms with what had been happening, I remember like I lost my train of thought around that. Oh, I know. I remember like, we were still together, but we were like in the end. It was in the end stages. And I remember saying to him, like we were arguing one point, there was alcohol involved. And I remember saying to him, like, I wish you would just hit me right now because then I could prove it.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and he was like, well, I'm not going to give you that. Um, which is kind of that's such an odd conversation, right? To say that in retrospect, like what who asks
But
for that and who
that's
said,
what you think of, that's what most
yeah,
people think of domestic violence. And
yeah,
so, yeah, I
yeah.
can prove it. It's okay for me to leave. See, he did that.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
get
took a
that.
lot of like really coming to terms with it. And I think one of the biggest things that opened my eyes was I was able to get support through a local organization that provides shelter and services to survivors and victims of domestic violence. And it was when I was sitting in group and I remember going to group and like there were women there who like there was one woman, I mean, it still makes my heart flutter to think she had been shamed in a basement. And
Wow.
and
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, it's just like these devastating stories of this like really, really intense physical violence and abuse and control. And but the things that they were talking about that they were struggling with mentally and emotionally were exactly the same as what I was struggling with. And like the things that they talked about that happened that were the belittling and the isolation and all of those like mental
Sharing those
emotional
secrets
control.
is so hard, you're in the world and you can't tell anybody, so
Yeah.
that's a weight. I experienced that for many years. I didn't tell a soul because I
Yeah.
thought if you knew the real me, you'd be running for the hills.
Mm,
Yes, mine was a different experience than yours. I was sexually abused by my grandfather from age 7 to 13. I didn't tell a soul until I was in my 20s.
mm.
So it was you just kept it as a secret. So yeah,
Yeah.
so
Right. Well, because there's so much shame associated with it. Because like I don't know why we're doing this. This is part of the mission I'm on with my work, but like why are we making the survivors carry the shame? It's the abusers that get to feel the shame. I mean, they're the only person that should feel any shame
right.
in
I
this
agree.
situation.
Well,
So,
let's
yeah.
shift a little bit now to your healing journey because
Yeah.
that's the most I feel like I have to address the actual, why you did this before we can go, but I don't want to focus on the pain. I want to focus on your journey of healing using the arts because I think it's so profound and why don't you start talking about that a little bit? Because
Yeah. Yeah, so well, let's see. I guess, we'll come back to that moment, but like fast forwarding to now, the work that I'm doing, I do a lot of different work as a creative, but my passion project is my Finding Wings project. So I'm creating a series of ceramic sculptures that are inspired by swans. And into the feathers of each one, I'm carving the stories of survivors of domestic violence. And the goal is to create a whole flock of these birds. Each one is telling one person's story and make this a traveling exhibition that can move around the country or the world and really work to break down some of that shame, to show survivors that like this is not something we need to be ashamed of. In fact, that who you became in overcoming this experience, right? The courage it took to leave, the resilience and strength you showed to begin and be on a healing journey is something to be celebrated, not shamed. That's really what I want the work to do. I look at so much art out there that's like about domestic violence or sexual abuse or all of that. And it's like there's so much about the darkness. And I think that's important, right? Like
Like
that's
we were
part of the
just
journey
talking
is
about, you
expressing
want to
that.
tell the story, but it's what is the healing journey when you cross over into that transformation of, I am not broken, I am not that
Yeah.
wound, I am more than enough. And
Yeah.
we all live with that. Yeah.
That's the part I want to tell. And I will never forget. It's so interesting how these like moments in our life get etched into our brain. And I will never
Hmm.
forget the night that I had the idea for this project. I was going to the group classes. At the time, I had just recently made a sculpture out of chocolate because that's my old life. I used to work at a chocolate shop.
I love it.
And I had had the opportunity to make this sculpture out of chocolate inspired by Swan Lake. It was for a local dance company that was doing a production of Swan Lake. And I had just done that, and I had gone to the group, and I had come home, and somebody I had been talking about that sculpture to somebody like the day before, and they had said, "Hey, aren't you a ceramic artist?" Which was funny because I had gone to school for ceramics, but remember I had told you I was in this like place of not like I was doing some stuff at work, but I wasn't really doing any other creative stuff. And
Hmm.
I kind of was like, oh, am I a ceramics artist? Like, it's been so long since I've touched clay. Can I even still claim that? But it was like that little seed was there. And I remember getting back from group that night, and there was like, I won't get into it for the interview, but a whole bunch of other stuff that happened that involved like my ex, like the one who I had experienced this with, and just a lot of stuff had happened that night that so my emotions were high. And I remember it just like hit me. Like people talk about a download or like an idea coming to them. And I was like, I have to make these swans. I have to make them out of clay. I have to carve these stories into them, right? I had been listening to all these women tell their stories, and I was like, this just needs to happen. Like it, and it came as this whole thing. And I hadn't even touched clay for like 10 years. And
Wow.
I was like, all
I've got
right, well,
goosebumps. I've got goosebumps because I do believe in that spiritual download when we're ready to hear the ideas and we listen, and we take it in. It's like, wow, you just never know when and how it's going to hit you.
yeah.
When I wrote my book, The Creative Activist, and I heard this download, you got to go interview 100 people. I said, what? What? I had done that in the past. I was originally going to write a book called Odyssey of Healing, Survivor to Thriver. And it was the first memoir. No one had done any memoirs before, but I was using my artwork. I was using, vignettes I had written and poems and stuff. And I took it to all the healers at the time, the premier healers, and they said, your work is not enough. You need more stories. And so I stopped. I didn't end up writing that book. I contribute to other people's books, but I never wrote that book. So going and hearing this voice saying, okay, you've got to interview people. When you listen, that's part of being a creative activist. It's connecting to something outside ourselves that's high, that for me at least, that that sharing and listening is just one of the keys to being that person. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I
No,
can't
it's okay.
figure
Let's
out
see
what you were
what
talking about.
I forget where I was. Oh, I know. I remember thinking like, really? I'm gonna do this? I hadn't touched clay in 10 years. I and then I was like, all right, I mean, here we go. Like, I guess this is what I get to do. And then it was a process, right? It wasn't like I could just make this sculpture. Like I said, I hadn't even touched clay. I didn't have a place. Like it's clay's not like, oh, I can just like color in front of the TV or something, right? I had to like get equipment and space and carve out time and get myself back into having a creative practice, which was, a challenge in and of itself. Um, but I think having that vision really drove me forward and gave me this like thing that I was like, I have to like this is this thing that seems so important, seems so much bigger than me, seems like the thing I am meant to be doing. And yeah, it drove me forward. And I think I needed that to do the work, to do the healing, to rebuild my creative work, right? It's like I was over here just like, oh, I've got to make this swan. I'm like driven by this thing I see in my head and I have to make it. But like underneath that, the more powerful forces at work were like, and you're doing the healing work. And you're like, as I relearned how to work with clay, I healed myself.
Love that. I love that. I've done some workshops with some therapists over the years, and I would bring in clay because they were holding so much anger and fear and and stuff from the work they're doing. They take on the work, and I had them play with clay, and it took them a while to get into it because there's something, the tactile feeling and being able to just punch it, throw it, roll it, whatever, without and not trying to create anything. But there's something about that experience in itself, just the tactile, that I think is healing, that we
Oh
get
yeah.
to do that. So I
Well,
love.
and I mean, I think part of the healing too is the creation process, but it's also, I mean, it's the earth, right? It's incredibly grounding. That's what one thing I love about clay is how elemental it is. It's like I'm taking a piece of the earth, the earth element, water element, I'm turning it into something, I'm interacting with the fire element. I think that part was incredibly healing too.
I loved how you described in one of your things I had listened to, read about how you work with the survivor. They tell you your story. So are you writing it in each of the feathers, or are they? And then how does, I mean, when you talked about the transformation, because you can see their words, but then as it's fired, it changes, which I love. Yeah, that's the Phoenix Rising for me. So why
Yeah.
don't you talk about
So,
that?
well, the process looks like this. So, when there's a survivor that I'm going to work with, and I just have to say as an aside, so the latest statistic I've heard is 1 in 4 women in America experience domestic violence, and the numbers change if we degender that and looking through the world and everything. But let's just say it's 1 in 4 women. It's not hard. It's not hard to find survivors. A lot of I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true. So a lot of them are people that I know, are friends, again, it's just, unfortunately, it's not hard. And it gets easier because now, as this is something I'm known for, people come to me all the time and reveal their stories to me or ask for support with their friend or whatever it is. So anyway, identify a person whose story I want to tell, and we sit down for an intentional creativity session where I lead them through a painting process I've developed where they create their shield of safety. And it's a step-by-step process where they're expressing themselves on the canvas. And while they are telling me their story, which I'm asking them questions and things to prompt them, to help them remember, um, to help like bring out the story. I'm guiding them through this painting process. So we kind of go back and forth between they're telling me their story, they're going through the painting process. There's different invitations in that, like to put marks on their canvas that represent their wounds and the pain and the things that happened. And also invitations to put marks on the canvas that represent like their prayers for themselves, for other survivors, for the abuser, all of those kinds of things. Um, and so we're going back and forth through the process, and they're getting a chance to really express and really bring some healing to a lot of things that have been unexpressed. One of them told me that, that getting to do that process and having somebody just witness and listen to their story and somebody who's been there and understands it, she said she felt like was finally being seen after just years of feeling invisible. And I've heard over and over from survivors how much they're like, one woman said it. She's like, I tried to tell people my story, but it's like they don't believe it. They don't think it can be true. They don't have the capacity to even hear the horrible things that have happened to me. So, just that process of being able to share the story and be witnessed is incredibly healing. So then after they've told me their story, which we do this on a video call, so I just have I record it and then have it transcribed. And then I take excerpts from that story and carve them into the clay. So the sculptures are actually made in a couple different pieces. I make the body part, and then I make like the head and neck part, and then I make the feathers all separately. So I shape the feathers, and then each one I'll carve. Like each one is basically a quote or an excerpt from their story. Um, and so then once I make all the different pieces and it dries and it goes through its first firing, then I add glaze to it and then we fire it again. And yeah, in that process, like the way that the glaze will like settle into the carving and change colors in the kiln. And for anybody who hasn't ever worked with clay, like glaze is not like paint. It's not like, oh, I put the blue on and it's blue there. Like sometimes you put blue on and it's pink after it comes out of the kiln because of the chemical reactions. And also thickness matters, time in the kiln matters, temperature in the kiln matters. Like I've had pieces at the top of the kiln look a totally different color than pieces in the bottom of the kiln, but they had the same glaze, the same clay, and the same amount of glaze on them because it was a different temperature. So we have to kind of let go of control in this moment and see what happens. And so in that moment, things change a little bit. And I love the metaphor of it because it kind of reminds me of how these stories, like they're a part of us, right? Each one of these survivors, these stories are something that she carries with her. They become a part of her. And yet they become, especially, for people who are committed to healing and growing and moving beyond what's happened to them, they they become kind of muted, right? They become like, this is part of my story, but it doesn't define me. And I love also the metaphor of how the stories become kind of muted because that's what happens in our society, right? We don't want to hear it. We don't have capacity. We're too overwhelmed. We don't want to sit with people's stories. We don't want to talk about the pain and the suffering and all of that. And so this and I mean, there's just so many reasons I could go on and on forever about it, but there's so many reasons why, yeah, the stories they get muted. And I feel like that's the same thing that happens with the sculptures.
I sort of, it's sort of like thinking about, it's sort of like the ugly duckling story, it turns into the beautiful swan kind of thing. But I also think of it as when we transform, because I've spent a lot of time with survivors as well, and it's when somebody sits and listens without judgment to their story, there is just such a calmness that comes over people. And it's the same thing, it's like whatever that is. And then they start to blossom because they believe anything is possible. If somebody,
Mhm.
one person can hear my story, and that's why I wanted to start doing this and creating this global platform, because we need more stories. We need to hear their stories, but we also need to hear how they're healing. Because I
Yeah.
don't want, like we talked in the beginning, it's not about being stuck in the pain. We all have to make a choice. Are we going to stay here or are we going to choose? Because I do believe it's a choice to heal. Yeah,
Yep.
it's scary. It can be crap, and it's like, I spent a lifetime saying it's not a safe world, it's not a safe world, but I've chosen to heal beyond that and face it with courage, and say, okay, I'm still going to tell my story. I'm going to share other people's stories because I think it's important.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're doing this. This work is amazing. I'm going to give you a minute to tell about your patron website, and then we're going to go on to these other pieces because I don't want to lose the other part of it. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I guess yeah, do you want to talk about the rebirth shows and
Yeah,
what I'm
okay,
doing
we'll
with
do
that?
that first,
Yeah.
then we'll do both of
It's
those. Okay,
it's
let's
kind of
talk about the
all
rebirth
it's all
show.
part of the same. So what has emerged from this, initially I just thought, oh, I'm going to make a flock of these sculptures. Well, the sculptures can take me a really long time to make. They're very involved. And so in the process of doing that, I got invited to do a solo show, and I said, hey, I don't have enough work yet. I'm not ready. But what about this? What do you think if we did a group show where we featured art by survivors of domestic violence? And I've just been so inspired by it that this is now part of the project of the Finding Wings project is creating these shows, Rebirth, art by survivors of domestic violence, where we're featuring art made by survivors, and I'm really focused on that story of the courage and the resilience and the strength and people expressing that part of it. I think there's so much of that like dark and cathartic art out there that's important, but it's just one side of the story.
Right. I have a
And
before and after on my website. It's here's my pain pieces, here's my healing pieces. Because there
Mhm.
was a direct change in my art as I could see when I started to heal. All of a sudden, black and white became color. My
Yeah,
images started to change. It was more worldview rather than just me and pain. So
yeah.
I love that you're doing that, and it's phenomenal. So
And the feedback on our first show, which happened in Yadkinville, North Carolina, which is near Winston-Salem, was really phenomenal. I think that the piece that stood out the most for me is a local woman who works in their organization that supports survivors. So she's like on the ground helping women get out of abusive relationships every day, going to court, things like that. In fact, she canceled like 3 meetings with me because she's like, I'm sorry I got called into court. And I was like, that's it is what it is, that's what you do.
right.
She said, and so this is somebody steeped in the work, right? Steeped in it. She said, I have never seen something so personal and emotional that just tells the story so much as this show. And I mean, that just like you were talking, I got goosebumps saying it again now. So yeah, it just was very clear to me that this is part of the work that I get to do. I love that Rebirth also helps create platforms for survivors, not just to tell their stories, but hopefully to like make money because, hey, financial control is one of the pieces of control. It's one of the things on that power and control wheel. It's one of the primary women's reason women don't
Oh,
leave abusive relationship is they can't afford to. They don't know how to make ends meet. And it goes deep and we won't get into that now, but so my hope is that as the Rebirth shows grow, it becomes also a place for artist survivors to earn money for their
love
work,
that. I
right?
think that's phenomenal. So that is great. So
So
why don't you tell people how they can find out, how they can connect with you?
yes, please. I hope you're inspired. And if you are and you want to like support the work, come find me on Patreon. It's Finding Wings with Elizabeth Foley on Patreon. And you can see all the information about things like our next Rebirth show, which right now is planned for October of 2025 in Eugene, Oregon. And you can learn more about the sculptures and hopefully support the work because that's the only way it happens is people like you choosing to be part of the journey. You can support at just $5 a month if you believe in it and you just want to make it happen. It's like buying me a cup of coffee, but it goes a long way. Or I have higher tiers too. Um, the most popular one is my Creative Explorer tier, which lets you come to a monthly workshop where we work on all kinds of themes using intentional creativity and art making to explore our own empowerment. And it's like if you're a survivor, it's perfect for you, but also you don't have to be a survivor to get a lot of value from that. It's really for anybody who wants to really like be a better version of themselves.
Right. I'm going to give you 1 minute to just talk about what is intentional creativity because you've
Oh,
used that term and people are like, oh, yeah.
or what is intentional creativity? 1 minute. Oh my gosh,
Well,
it's so many
you can
things.
take a couple. That's okay.
It's so many things, but I think the idea of intentional creativity was something alive in me. And then I found Shiloh Sophia and was like, oh my gosh, somebody's teaching this. Awesome. So also it came through Shiloh Sophia McLeod and her work. Um, and it's really just this idea of bringing intention into the work that we're doing. It's this idea that like what we're doing as creatives has power beyond just being a mark on a page.
Right.
Today I was working with a group of students and we were creating a page that was like an altar of self-love, an altar of love for our
Beautiful.
bodies. And I said, as you glue this picture on, like I was gluing a picture of a flower, imagine that the glue is this magical glue that can really anchor self-love in your body, and it may sound like a little woo-woo to people, but like there's
Not to me, but I get it. Yes.
not, yeah, but no, I know that there's some people like magical glue. What is she talking about? But
Right.
it's true. Like getting these things out of our bodies, out of our heads, through our hands onto paper has power. It has power to heal, to alchemize, to change things and at the core, it's really just about self-expression, right? When we bottle it all up and hold it all inside, it creates disease in our body. But when we express it, um, it can live outside of our body. It can be transmuted into something else. So I guess that's my 1 minute
Oh,
about
you did
intentional
great.
creativity. But
I appreciate it. So let's just, I'd like to end on, what is the legacy you'd like to see or the vision? If you could shift one cultural norm about domestic violence through your art, what would that be? What is the personal legacy you'd like to leave? I always believe in
yeah,
that because I think that's, for me, that's the why. Why am I doing this work and making a difference?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, again, I could speak into that for a long time, but I think there's two things for me. One is I want to shift this story of shame. I want survivors to stop, to be able to experience themselves being celebrated and their story of being a survivor. I want survivors to be able to say, yeah, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. It was horrible. And I had this incredible strength to get out of it, to move beyond it, to have the courage to heal. And I think the other thing I want is I want women to feel like they matter, to feel empowered so that so that we're not choosing these things again and again, right? I mean, there's one survivor story where she said, what was it? She said, I didn't know about boundaries. I didn't know it was okay to say no. like, I hope that this work makes it so that no woman ever feels that way. So
I
every woman
love
knows
that.
it's okay to say no.
I do. I truly appreciate your message. I appreciate the work you're doing. And I'm so excited we got to meet. And again, everybody, this is the Creative Activist, and it's more than just a project. I want this to be a global movement to break the silence, the stigma, and empower others to become leaders in their own light. We need to turn trauma into tools for transformation, whether it is sexual abuse, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's gun violence, it doesn't matter. We need to build a world where we can transform, and healing is not only possible but celebrated. So thank you
Mm.
for joining us today, and I'm very excited. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.